I want to get into more of this now with the Power Panel. Cassie Smedile, Executive Director of the America Rising PAC, and Kevin Walling, former Biden campaign surrogate. Good to see you both. Cassie, first of all, this is a really top-line issue for so many parents because it sounds like they might not be able to express themselves, or is that taking it too far?
No, that's absolutely right, that what you have here, by and large, no one's condoning violence, but you've got concerned parents who are voicing their frustration with what they have seen over their children's shoulder happening in their child's classroom. And by the way, they only had the ability to see that because these school boards and these elected officials refused to let the kids get back into the classroom. But that's another conversation.
So they were on Zoom.
That's right. And so what you're seeing here is this frustration of this persistent condescending tone from school boards that say, we don't want you to have a say in this conversation. And look no further than what we saw in last week's Virginia gubernatorial debate when Terry McAuliffe said the quiet part out loud, saying, I don't think parents should have a say in their children's education. And isn't it coincidental that he's heavily backed by the teachers unions? So this idea that we're now bringing in DOJ, it seems like it's just the next step in the school boards and the teachers unions' persistent effort to keep parents out of this conversation.
You know, and not to put too fine a point on it, but it's interesting, too, the timing of this, Cassie and Kevin. I don't know if you noticed, we reported on this yesterday, that a black caucus group in McAuliffe's own state decided to back the Republican in the race, Youngkin. So obviously, some things are having a power with voters right now. Wonder if this is one of them. Thousands of people gathered outside of Washington State Capitol building to protest the state's vaccine mandate and were heard belting out the national anthem at one point. So this is the other issue uniting parents and others in that watch.
See, can you see by the dawn's early light?
About 3,000 people attended the protest ahead of the state's October 18th deadline for all state workers to be vaccinated. Protesters chanted outside the New York Department of Education yesterday after thousands of teachers there were laid off for not complying with the NYC vaccine requirement for all educators and school staff.
Everyone should have the right to decide whether they want to be vaccinated or not.
We will not comply. We will not comply.
I don't want this vaccine. I have medical reasons not to.
It's my body, my choice. The vaccine you won't force.
New York's largest private health care provider also fired 1,400 employees who refused the vaccine. So, Kevin, parents often will go to these school board meetings because I want to knit these two issues together. And some are talking critical race theory and what they want their children to learn in the classroom and what they don't. And others will talk about masking and vaccines. And people have a right to go to those venues, those board meetings, and express themselves. So that's one issue. But what do you do about this other one when people say they don't want to have vaccines and you end up with this? Fired teachers, those who can't make it into the classroom now, kept from it.
Yeah, Harris, we're at an inflection point in this country, and I'm happy to see Cassie and you and myself united in condemning any kind of violence, whether it be in front of a school district, whether it be on a Congress on your corner event with Gabby Giffords, whether it be on a baseball field with Republicans practicing for the congressional baseball game. Something is happening in our politics where we're moving past civility in our conversations. Listen, I'm a Democrat that goes on Fox News. Harris, you and I have had great conversations over the years, and I believe in that dialogue. But when it turns violent, that's when it becomes extraordinarily problematic in this country. And we've got to tone down this rhetoric. Now, on the point with vaccines and mandates, I think, I'm a Democrat. I believe vaccine mandates work. And we're seeing that play out in the last, yesterday, for example, we're seeing first-time doses nearly double where we were a week ago. Many of those are the healthcare workers. Many of those are the teachers that have been holding out with, questions about their job security.
So when you say, just let me hit the pause button. And I like the way you describe our conversations as great because they fall short of violence. Well, I would hope so.
Well, we're not in studio, Harris.
Yeah,
I want to be back with you in studio.
Yeah, but that's not why we don't get together.
That's true.
So I am a little confused when you say mandates work. I want to understand what you consider them working for. And then, Cassie, I'll come to you. Like, who do they work for?
Take, for example, the take for example, at Chiron right now, talking about the healthcare workers in New York State for this largest healthcare system. Just 2% of these employees, which represent about 1,400 people, fail to get the vaccine in time. Now, if I'm engaging with the healthcare system, I want to make sure that nurse or that doctor, if they're caring for my parents that are older, are vaccinated. You know, I want healthcare professionals and especially teachers that are forming the minds of our children to believe in science, for God's sakes.
So I'm gonna push back for the sake of argument here, mainly because I like science. The science has not showed that people who professionally know how to use PPE have necessarily spread the disease, and many of them have been infected. So I want to make sure we get all of the science brought in. Cassie?
Yeah, to your point there, that we were perfectly fine having our first responders and frontline workers out there with their DIY masks and PPE working the long hours while we all converted to this life of Zoom and food delivery. But now that there's this vaccine mandate, all of a sudden they're thrown out on the street. And I think it's a fair argument to say, don't we know best? Shouldn't we be allowed to have these conversations with our employer without the heavy hand of government coming in and puppeteering the conversation? But I just have to go back to that point about having civil discourse, which absolutely we're all in favor of. I just seem to recall far more violence happening in the defund the police movement than at school board meetings. And I think that's notable.
Or what about January 6th,
I'll bring
Cassie?
you both back. Kevin and Cassie, thank you. That was an interesting point. Good way to end,
Harris.
Cassie. We'll move on.